Good evening, everybody. Whoever doesn't know me, this is Abed Baidas, and I've got the good Michael Dermer from New York. He's got some good stories to tell us. Most of you know his Identity Branding Forum, where we are more focused on to building and empowering brands and make them sustainable. And I will let Michael explain basically a little briefly about himself and his organization. And from there, we start with this presentation. Michael?
Thank you so much. And it's a pleasure to speak to everybody from across the Atlantic Ocean. My company, The Lonely Entrepreneur, seeks to help entrepreneurs turn their passion into success. And we do that a bunch of different ways through lonelyentrepreneur.com, our online learning community, which is designed to be a one-stop shop platform for entrepreneurs. Our book, The Lonely Entrepreneur, we'll speak about a little bit, as well as helping organizations empower entrepreneurs. So it's really a pleasure to be here and to speak with you today.
Okay, marvelous. Michael, you want to be the presenter, or shall I continue and then I'll move the slides as you move on?
You can turn it over to me if you'd like.
Okay, hold on. Now you are the presenter. Hello?
Okay, it's just taking a second to get going.
Just promise to give it back to me.
You know what, Abed, it may be easier. It's asking me to install an extension, so it may be easier if we just have you do it.
Okay. Okay, hold on a second. Let me see if I can get it back.
Yep.
Okay, what you need to do is make me back the presenter, because for some reason I cannot.
Okay.
Hold on a second.
Yep.
Okay, I got it. Okay, can you hear me? Okay, Michael? Hello? Michael? Michael?
Here we go.
Can you hear me?
I'm here.
Okay.
Yes.
Now I'm going to start with the next slide.
Please, thank you.
Right. The floor is yours, Michael.
Okay, I can't see it, but I'll...
Okay, hold on. I guess I need to start sharing. Because sometimes you have to be as fast enough with technologies.
There you go. That's coming up
Okay.
now. Terrific. Thank you again. And so, as I mentioned, what we do here at The Lonely Entrepreneur is to try to unlock the potential of entrepreneurs throughout the world by turning their passion into success. And so what we try to do here today as we talk about the topic of entrepreneurism throughout the globe is give a little bit of background of our journey as entrepreneurs that led us to create The Lonely Entrepreneur, to talk a little bit about some of the pressures and struggles that entrepreneurs go through against that backdrop, and then finally close on a couple of hopefully lessons and key insights that we can all take away as we think about becoming entrepreneurs, growing our businesses, or becoming more successful entrepreneurs. So if you go to the next slide. like to share with you a little bit of my journey. I'm from the United States, grew up around New York City, went to law school and became a corporate lawyer, worked for a large New York law firm doing very large commercial transactions, mergers and acquisitions. But I always knew that I wanted to start a business. I just didn't know what that business was. But after 3 years of a very expensive United States law school education and becoming a lawyer, I decided to leave that and start a healthcare company. And what was unique about the company that I started, it was the first company in the United States to reward people for being healthy. Most people think of reward programs in the context of loyalty programs like credit cards and banks and airlines, things like earning miles and earning points. We were the first company in the United States to reward for healthy behavior. In the United States, as many of you know, healthcare costs have been out of control for some time, and many of those healthcare costs are preventable. And so we started the first company to reward people for being healthy. So left a big corporate law job in the year 2000 and started that company. For the first 5 years, like many entrepreneurs, we were told by the United States healthcare industry, we will never reward people for being healthy. In other words, we will never reward people for doing the things that they should be doing. And we made the argument to them, well, of course you will, because it saves you money. Well, it took us the better part of 5 years to evangelize that concept. After about 5 years, in 2005, 2006, we really started to grow after 5 very lean years, as we like to say, blood, sweat, and tears here in the United States, of bootstrapping an early stage company. By '06, we really started to grow a lot. The concept had caught on, and we grew significantly to almost 500 employees by 2008. So over the course of the 3 years from 2006 to 2008, grew a lot, took venture capital money. And by 2008, we had quote unquote made it. And essentially had created an industry here in the US. And we had many people following at that point, but we had such a significant lead. And, at that moment, we were trying to decide what to do. Are we going to sell the company? Are we going to raise more money and grow more? And we literally almost got destroyed overnight by the United States financial crisis in 2008. All of our clients were the largest companies in America. Our platform was a technology platform that would be licensed by health plans and big US companies to save themselves healthcare costs. And as you can imagine, as the US economy and the worldwide economy took its toll on the biggest companies in America, it took a toll on us. So our business that took us the better part of 10 years to build nearly got destroyed overnight. We had venture capital investors at the time. I had family members that had invested a significant amount of money. And so what was a very rosy story a couple months earlier was now, staring on the brink of bankruptcy. We were fortunate enough to have a group of people that really battled and scrapped and clawed their way back. And over the course of about 2.5, 3 years during that crisis, at the end of 2.5 years or so, we started to grow again. And then once the financial crisis in the US had subsided, everybody was interested in healthcare. We got approached by some investment bankers who thought what we were doing was quite innovative and we had been around for some time. We got approached and we got bought. And it was an incredibly wild journey. Those 3 years through the financial crisis, watching this company we had built from nothing almost get destroyed was an amazing experience. And we were fortunate enough to bounce back and sell it. And then shortly after that, I was just helping entrepreneurs in New York City for fun, just taking a break. And one of them said to me, being an entrepreneur is really lonely. And it really struck a chord that whether you were in New York or Silicon Valley or Dubai or Shanghai, the one thing we all shared as an entrepreneur is the struggle of what it takes to get there. And that led us to create The Lonely Entrepreneur, which started with the writing of the book that you see on the screen, but really our mission to try to give people a better chance of success and try to give back a little bit to society. And I had the great fortune of meeting Abed over in Dubai a while ago. And now we kind of wake up every day trying to help entrepreneurs have a better chance of success. So Abed, if you can go to the next slide, please. So when we look at the year 2020 that's upon us, and we say, entrepreneurism and small business is a worldwide phenomenon. As you think about what's going on in the UAE and the Middle East overall, and the role that entrepreneurism will play in job growth and in spurring economic development, you say to yourself, what does it take to be successful in the year 2020? So we want to talk about that a little bit. Next slide, if you wouldn't mind. So the first thing we have to really understand, and I think this is especially true in countries like the UAE, where entrepreneurism is certainly not completely new, but relatively new. But that is, what is it actually like to sit in the shoes of the entrepreneur? It's one thing to go work for a large company, to work for the government. It's quite different to go work for yourself or for a smaller company. So we want to share a little bit about the entrepreneur's perspective. Next slide. So we have developed something that we call, identified rather, something we call the 4 Ps: pressure, passion, pleasure, and pain. And so these are 4 things that entrepreneurs experience, not over the course of years, sometimes in the very same day. Pressure, which is obviously the pressure of financial pressure and, putting all your money on your credit card to grow your business, and the pressure of family and supporting and all that stuff. And passion, right? We used to kid around here in New York and say, well, someone would say, well, I'm going to make, meatballs. And someone would say, well, wait a minute, there's already plenty of meatballs. And someone would say, well, not my meatballs, right? Everybody has a passion for what they're doing. And then there's the pleasure, the first time that you get your first customer, your first great employee, the first time you see your product roll off the shelf. There's an incredible amount of pleasure that comes with that. And also the pain. Probably the best example is when you talk to investors, right? You prepare your product or your service, your company, and you go to present it to investors. And investor says it's not that great, and it's almost like calling your baby ugly, right? And we experience these 4 Ps, and it's important that we understand that we're going through these and we're going to experience these things, because through the entrepreneurial journey, we're going to have to do and say lots of different things that will help us get through. And understanding this is kind of our state of affairs is a super important foundation to start with. So, Abed, next slide. So what does it mean to be an entrepreneur? Well, what it means is that, and for everybody in the audience that knows this, these will ring true, who are entrepreneurs. One, no one is going to care as much as you do. You'll have people out there talking about lives and families and vacations, and all you can do is think about your business. And if you have an expectation that people will care about this as much as you do, you're going to be sorely disappointed. Second is, we call it, overwhelming is an understatement. When you are putting together a business or growing a business, the number of things that you have to manage and digest and figure out is significant. And that can be quite overwhelming, and you have to understand that, and you have to figure out ways to deal with it, which we'll show you a little bit later. Next is, we all get advice that drives us crazy. We will get advice from family, from friends, from other people that work in large companies. They will say silly things like, just go to the movies and you'll be fine, or just take a vacation for a weekend and you'll be fine. And all of that advice from people that haven't experienced those 4 Ps can be quite frustrating. Next is, we call this your balloon is full. If you've ever seen an entrepreneur on stage at like a demo day or startup event, and they ask questions to the audience, and somebody in the audience will go to ask them a question, and they can't even let the person in the audience ask the question before they start to spurt out the answer. Or they would say to an entrepreneur like me, do you prefer to be called Mike or Michael? And I will give them 30 minutes on my pricing model, right? Our balloon is full of this air and this energy and all this information that's gone into creating this baby of ours. And that balloon has to go somewhere. So regardless of what people ask us about or want to talk about, we're always kind of spurting the air out of the balloon. Next is, we're going to have 100 hours of work for 10 hours of time. Remember that in the startup world, in the early stage world, you're going to have a lot of things to do and not all the resources to do it. So how do you figure out how to manage that? Next is, who do you trust? And when I say trust, I don't necessarily mean honesty. It's just that you get advice and guidance from a lot of different people who have different views. For example, if you ask two different people in Silicon Valley in the US, should an early stage entrepreneur write a business plan? One of them would say, don't write a business plan because it's going to be obsolete the minute you finish it. And the other would say, absolutely, you need to write a business plan. Right? And so you get this advice from two very, very smart people in my examples, but you just don't know who to trust. And finally, whether you wanted to be a CEO or not, you have to be the CEO. So you could be a technologist, a carpenter, someone in fashion, a doctor, the list goes on, a chef, and that may be your skill. But when you create an entrepreneurial venture, you are the CEO, whether you like it or not. You may just have wanted to be the chef or just wanted to be the technologist, but you actually have to embrace that you are actually the leader of this business and have to lead it, and you can't just think about how to make the best meal for that evening. Okay. Abed?
Okay, when I move to the next slide, everybody, you have on your left-hand side, there is a tab called Q&A, questions and answers. Click it and type whatever questions you have for Michael, or ask to speak after we finish the presentation to ask your questions. Thank you.
So I've given you a little bit of the backdrop, and for those of you who are entrepreneurs, a lot of those phraseology will make sense to you, right? You're experiencing it, we all have. And then you say to yourself, okay, it's the year 2020. We understand we're under the influence of the 4 Ps. We understand it's overwhelming and we're experiencing 100 hours of work in 10 hours of time, of course. But what do we do about that? Like, what do we have to do in the year 2020 with all the technology? And so, first of all, I would leave you or start you with a philosophy. And that first philosophy is that passion, grit, working really hard at it, and a good idea are not enough. When I started my business in the early 2000s, passion, grit, and a good idea was plenty. As long as you had those things, you would be successful, because not everybody was an entrepreneur and there wasn't as much technology and capital. But today it's not enough. It is in fact just enough to start. If you don't have passion, if you don't have grit, if you don't have a good idea, you can't even try to be an entrepreneur. But it's not enough to be successful. Secondly is, we need to develop skills to be better entrepreneurs. We don't say to entrepreneurs, you have to get better at this, right? We say that to a professional athlete. We say it to a mother. The first time a mother has a child, she's not an experienced mother. She learns and she grows. But for some reason, when it comes to entrepreneurs, I bet I've used this joke with you before. It's like we put somebody in the middle of the desert without a compass and without a bottle of water and say, go figure it out, right? We actually have to develop the skills to be better entrepreneurs each and every day. And there are many, many, many skills. But finally, while we as entrepreneurs don't have all the capital we need or all the resources we need, we do have the ability to think differently. And that is something that will serve us and will be super important, because we don't have capital, we don't have resources like larger organizations do. Okay, so how do we embrace the journey of improving our skills as an entrepreneur? Next slide, please. So here is, I'm gonna go through about 10 different examples of skills that are, and there's many, many of them, that are the types of skills that will give you a better chance of success as an entrepreneur. And the first couple here in particular are the ones that I certainly believe are the most critical. And this is what we call kind of the intelligence we need, right? If we're going to be really good at being an entrepreneur, we have to have intelligence. First is what we call find playgrounds where no one else is playing. And I truly believe this is by far the most important skill you can develop as an entrepreneur. If you think of the world that we live in, right? The world we live in is cluttered. We're involved with social media. We barely can pay attention to the things that are coming across our desk every day. And it becomes very, very difficult to pay attention to why one solution is different than another solution. There's also many, many big companies out there bringing solutions to the table. What this says is you have to find an area, a space, an approach, not where you're going to do it better than somebody else, but fact, you're the only person doing it, right? You have to find, and again, this is a US term, a playground where only you are playing. right? And if you're able to find that playground, then you get to set the rules, right? You get to set what the pricing is. You get to set the criteria for what's a good or a bad solution. And it takes an incredible amount of time and effort and energy to actually find this playground, okay? If you think about the concept of Starbucks, at the time that Starbucks started, there was plenty of coffee, especially here in the United States. There was no need for more coffee. And Starbucks, not only was it going to roll out a new concept, but it was going to do it where it had all of this real estate that it owned. That if for some reason the coffee didn't sell, they would be stuck with billions of dollars of real estate. So how is it that they won? Well, they won because they created a different playground, right? If you remember the beginning of Starbucks, people would say, hey, just come here and meet your friends. Come here and meet your business colleagues. They didn't even try to get you to buy a cup of coffee. They created the coffee shop as a community, and that was their playground. And that became the criteria that they won on, even though there was plenty of coffee, right? Because remember, there's competition everywhere. In every single type of business, regardless of what it is in this day and age, there's always more technology, there's always more money. Everybody has a competitor. It's a function of finding that specific playground nobody else is playing. I'll give you a very simplistic example. Let's say someone develops a wonderful red dress for a woman, and they go to the department stores around the world and they say, we've got this wonderful red dress. Well, the most likely answer to that would be, well, we have plenty of red dresses. We don't need another red dress. But what if you took that same red dress and you made it part of a personal shopping experience for every new banker and lawyer and investment banker in New York City? And it was the only red dress in that collection, right? In that playground, they would win. They would be the red dress. Whereas if they took that same red dress to Macy's, for example, they would lose. So you have to fight really, really hard to find the playground where nobody else is playing. Okay? And I do believe that this is the most important skill that you can find. What is it you're addressing that's not just quote unquote a unique selling proposition, but what is it that you're addressing that is actually a playground that you're defining? Think about the business that I described that I started, rewarding people for being healthy. At the time that I started that business, there were many multi-billion-dollar loyalty companies, companies that were running points programs and reward programs throughout the world. And all we did was apply it to healthcare. All we did to apply it to a playground where nobody else was playing. And even though when we started, we were nothing, and the other companies were multi-billion-dollar companies, we became the leader. By the time they realized what was going on, about 2 years into it, they were following us, and we were setting the rules, and we were setting traps for them that gave us the opportunity to win. You have to spend your time finding your playground when nobody else is playing. Second, positioning is more important than product. And what I mean by this is entrepreneurs will invest endless time and money in making their product or service perfect. And what you realize is that in a world of clutter, people don't actually pay attention to the differences. They only pay attention to the differences until you really make them go, wow, right? If you've ever seen a car commercial, there isn't a car commercial out there where they say, we'd like you to open up the manual and read through the manual and understand why this car is so great. They ask you to get a feeling about the car. And once you get a feeling about the car, then you will, as we say here in the United States, look under the hood. Back in the early stages of my company, our technology developers would complain that they didn't like Microsoft products, and yet everybody used them, right? They used them because they had positioned it better. The same thing is true of the iPhone. You know, the technology for the iPhone existed for 10 years before the iPhone was created. All they did was package it and position it better. Okay, so even though our tendency is to really spend all of our time and energy and effort on the product or the service, because that's going to make the difference, the positioning of it is just as important, and you have to spend just as much time on that. And Abed, if there's questions that come up along the way, please stop me, or else I'll just kind of keep going through if that's okay.
Or just write it in the question and answers area on your left-hand side tab.
Great. Okay. Next is you can't chase every customer. You know, when you're an entrepreneur, you have limited resources, and so one of the things that we all have a tendency to do is to go look for revenue and customers wherever we can find them, right? And what that tends to do is it tends to distract us, right? Let's say that, for example, we're selling our service to customers whose names start with the letter A, right? And we go and we chase customers whose names start with the letter A, and we find that we have some challenges, right? Well, that's always the case when you have a new venture. You're always going to have challenges. It's by definition new. Well, we can do one of two things. We can stay with customer A and learn more about customer A, right? And get better at it and price it better and package it better. Or we can go after customer B. Well, when we go after customer B, what do we think happens? We just have different challenges. So even though our tendency is to, there's an entrepreneur right now that gets a phone call that even though they're not selling to the UAE, they'll get a phone call that somebody will say, well, if you just jump on a plane and come to UAE, we have a customer for you. Even though it's a big distraction for their business and it's not the core of what they're doing, they still consider doing it. And it really becomes a drain of very scarce resources. You lose your focus and you don't actually get really good at understanding customer A. The best analogy I can use for this is if you go to work the same way every day, you commute the same way, you start to learn what time to be at what spots, how the weather affects you, how traffic affects you, and you start to get efficient at that. If you go to work a different way every day, it becomes very difficult to become efficient at that. And that's what happens when you chase every customer. Next, why build a rocket when there are plenty? There are many, many innovative ideas out there, but they require capital and they require speed. And what early stage entrepreneurs don't have a lot of times is capital or speed, right? Because they don't have resources. However, there are many large companies throughout the world that are thirsting for innovative ideas. Ideas that if they could put what they have, which is capital and resources behind, they can make grow very, very quickly. So for example, my idea, rewards for being healthy, imagine if we had taken this to one of the United States credit card companies like a Visa or a MasterCard or American Express. They might have been able to do what we did very, very quickly and could have applied it to healthcare. And even to this day, there is no United States credit card company that is pursuing healthcare. So at the time, and many of you out there, it's not, the only way to start a business is not, bootstrap it, raise some money from your family, get it to another little level, and then go raise venture capital money and grow. You can go to organizations that have capital and resources and say, hey, I have this really good business plan. I'm just looking for the right strategic partner. Next, and this is a very United States analogy, so pardon. Know what inning you're in. In the United States in baseball, we have 9 innings, 9 sections, if you will, of a game. And a lot of times as an entrepreneur, we have such a belief in our product that we overestimate how quickly the market will adopt our products. For example, when you reward people for being healthy, it just makes economic sense. For example, when I started my business, I heard a statistic that said for every 10 pregnant women that don't follow their prenatal care, the healthcare system, the US healthcare system, loses $1 million. Right? So if those 10 women would just follow the normal care of their checkups and all those services, the system would save $1 million. So you could say, well, wait a minute. So if we gave these 10 women who aren't doing this $10,000 US for a total of $100,000, well, that would save $1 million. So you would make $900,000. It just makes complete sense. But we overestimated how quickly the healthcare industry would adopt. We thought they would adopt it in 3 years, and it ended up taking 5. So by not knowing, as we say, what inning you're in, you mistime things. And part of that is that the 4 Ps I mentioned before, right? It's this whole idea of passion, right? You believe in what you're doing. You see it in ways others can't see it. You have to be astute enough to understand that knowing what inning that you're in and timing up your business plans, your people, your financing to where you actually are, can lead you to much greater success. Next slide, please. Abed, how are we doing on time?
We're doing fine.
Great.
We still have half an hour to go yet.
Terrific. So next is what we call surviving on planet investor. I'm sure many of your people in your audience have raised money in their past lives, and they understand that if you've never raised money before, it's literally like being on another planet. There's a different language, there are different actors, and even the terminology in and of itself is very difficult. And in order to survive on that planet, if you will, you have to develop certain skills and capabilities. And there are many, many skills, as you can imagine, but I will leave you with one or two that hopefully will be helpful. First of all, as you can imagine, investors basically look for four things, right? Is there a large market? Are you uniquely approaching that market, right? Do you have some playground where nobody else is playing, if you will, approach to that market? Do you have a capable team that can execute a plan? And what traction do you have? Have you gotten customers? Have you gotten investors? Have you gotten great employees to come to the table, right? You have to get investors to say yes to those four things. And if they do, then all of the details will make a difference. Investors, for the most part, don't care about how until you tell them why, right? And those four things really represent why this is a viable opportunity and something they should be excited about. Okay, second is there's a way in which you communicate with investors. For example, when somebody presents to an investor, almost all of them will say something to the effect of, what we're doing is great. Like, we believe we are great. We believe we are awesome. We believe our solutions are awesome. Our product is awesome. Our technology is awesome. Nobody goes in front of an investor and says, our technology is no good. Okay, so as you can imagine, telling an investor that your whatever it is awesome, that makes no difference. Okay, so how is it that you convince an investor that you're awesome? You can't tell them. Here's what you should do. You should always rely on third parties. And what I mean by that is tell them, don't listen to us, here's 3 customers to call, right? Or don't listen to us, take a look at, we just got these articles in the paper, right? Or don't listen to us, take a look at the 3 employees that we just brought on, people that are astute leaders that have come joined our company because of the success we're having, right? Bringing to the table kind of third-party validation of what you're doing is so much greater than anything it is that you can say. Second is addressing your weaknesses, right? It's very counterintuitive for an entrepreneur to come to the table and say, here are our weaknesses. In fact, you would think it would be the opposite, right? You would come to the table and say, here's what are all the things that we're good at. Not only are investors interested in obviously exciting and viable markets and business ideas, but they're also interested in the leaders that they're going to give their capital to. Some investors say their most important investment criteria is the leader. And so when you come to the table and you say, here is my enterprise and here's what we're showing you and here's the market and the product or the service and here's our plan of what we're going to do with your precious money, you should come to the table and say, this is what we do well, this is where we have gaps or holes, and here is our plan for addressing those gaps and holes, right? You may come to the table and say one of two things. You could say, one, we have no competition, right? We're as I say in the US, a unicorn, right? Investors roll their eyes when they hear that. Everyone has competition. Remember, an oil company is making skyscrapers, can make pizza tomorrow, right? There's no limit on what capital can do in the world that we live in. And so going to the table and saying, oh, I have no competition is just not reality. What investors do want to hear is somebody say, we have lots of competition. There will be more competition because the market we're chasing is lucrative. But here is my plan for addressing that competition. Here is my plan. Here's my strategy for when you give us capital with which we're going to execute our plan to overcome that competition. So when you go to investors, proactively bring up those weaknesses and show them you have a specific plan to address them. Next is what we call being humble and a learner. Being an entrepreneur, especially if you're creating a new market or in new-ish parts of the world like the Middle East, where entrepreneurism is not 100 years old, you need to have a healthy dose of ego. You need to tell institutions that you're proposing doing things differently, right? And that takes ego. But at the same time, it takes humility, because to be an entrepreneur, and anybody on the call today knows this is the case, is incredibly humbling. And not only is it humbling, but you need to be humble in order to embrace the journey of all the things that you need to learn. Take something simple like a restaurant, right? You've got food, you've got drink, you've got inventory, you have operations, you have people you need to manage, you have financing. I mean, the list goes on for virtually every business. And so you have to embrace the journey of actually improving as an entrepreneur. And once you have the ability to be humble and to be a learner, you find that you really do start to improve your skills. I wish that somebody had told me when I was, age 18 or 19 or 20, hey, you may be an entrepreneur someday, so you should start to learn these series of skills to get better at it. Because by the time I was 25 or 30 years old, I would have been a lot better than I was. So you must be humble, and you have to embrace the journey of learning to be a better entrepreneur. Next is knowing where you need help. Entrepreneurs have a vision of where they want to go. They have an understanding of what they believe, the problem they believe their product or service solves. And in the context of that, they believe they need to do everything. And there's a phrase that's in the Lonely Entrepreneur book, which is that doing everything isn't dedication, it's bad leadership. Your job is not to do everything. Your job as the leader is to understand all the different pieces that have to exist, and then to figure out where you need help. And that doesn't mean just where you need help, but it's also the things that you don't like to do, right? So the things you like to do and the things you're good at, and the things you don't like to do are the things you are not good at. And if you invest a lot of time and effort in the things that you're not good at, or the things that you don't like to do, eventually you will get frustrated with your enterprise. And as all of us know, as an entrepreneur, we have to have the ability to stay through the difficult times. And so knowing where you need help and knowing what you're good at is incredibly important. If you're a technologist, for example, you might sit up all night long, and write code, and you'd be happy to do it, and you love it. But if somebody asked you to put together a financial statement or work on an accounting package, it would be the last thing that you want to do. You need to know where you need help, and also need to know what you like to do and what you don't like to do. Okay. Next, and we've all experienced this, is managing the chaos of the day. We talked about before this notion of having 100 hours of work and 10 hours of time. And that's the way it feels almost every day. But there are things that we can do about it. There are skills that we can develop and implement that can actually have an impact on this. First is priorities. If you ask entrepreneurs, you have to, and say to them, you have to prioritize, they will think you're crazy. You'll say, well, wait a minute, I have to do the website, and I have to raise money, and I have to hire people, and I have to, well, nothing works if you don't set priorities, right? If you worked at a large company and you were doing strategic planning for the next year, and you raised your hand in a strategic planning session and you said, we're going to do everything next year. We're going to go after every market. They would literally escort you out of the building, right? You have to set priorities in anything you do. And just because we call ourselves an entrepreneur doesn't mean we can ignore that. Remember, everyone has more to do than they have time. right? So why are some people successful and some people less successful? The key is to set priorities. When you do set priorities, what does that mean? I mean, it's just a couple of words. It means that you pick 3 of them. When you pick those 3 of them, you build process and structure around it. You have a weekly meeting on them, right? You have metrics around them. You bring together your team to talk about them once a week, right? You actually build a process that is reflective of the fact that you made it a priority. If something's a priority, you should have a weekly meeting on it, your team or advisors together talking about it and actively measuring it. There's other things that you can do that aren't necessarily one of those priorities that may not garner that same level of attention, but you need to set priorities. Second is the way that you kind of go through your day. Let's imagine that every day we come to work with, we have 8 or 10 hours of work and we have 100 hours of things to do. In that particular scenario, which is basically every day for an entrepreneur, what we should do is we should make sure that the 5 things we pick for that day, those are the things we do. And we don't worry about the 95 that we're not going to get to. Right? Because if we worry about the 95, we certainly don't get to the 95, but we also don't do the 5. And when we kind of flail like that, that's when we as entrepreneurs feel like we're not making progress. When you do feel like you're making progress, if you come to the table every day, I've got these 5 things I want to get done. I will leave some extra space for number 6, which always inevitably comes up. But in these 5 things, I'm going to emerge at the end of the day knowing, okay, I got those 5 done. And now I'll move on to the next 5. Okay? I understand that it's not always that linear, but create the discipline to stick to the things that you believe are the most important things that you've set for that day. And next, just how you manage your day, okay? Do the most difficult things first thing in the morning, right? So sitting on a webinar at 10 p.m. in Dubai, if that's where most people are, it's not that hard, right? You can sit, you can listen, you can take this in. But when you have the things that require the most energy, the most intelligence, those are the things you should do first thing in the morning, okay? In addition, when you are working, turn off your devices, okay? When you're working on your computer, turn off your phone, put it on the other side of the room, turn off your other devices and put it on the other side of the room. When you're working in your computer, shut down your email, right? How many of us are working on something and hop back and forth in and out of our email, okay? These are things that we do and we understand why we do them, but they're inefficient, right? And they take away our valuable time and energy. So is there a chaos of the day? Of course, but there's things you can do to make that chaos a little more manageable. And then this, I'm going to leave you with kind of this last one, which is what we call you can't evaluate your life in the middle of the fight. There are those probably on the phone today and others that are going through the entrepreneurial journey. The entrepreneurial journey has ups and downs every single day. It can be one of the most rewarding and also the most death-defying things that you can do. When you're successful, when we sold our company ultimately and when we built it up, it was an incredibly rewarding experience to see all these people come together. But then there was the other side of the coin of the downs and the financial crisis. And entrepreneurs sometimes experience this every day. Here's what I would say to you. When you're evaluating your life and your path as an entrepreneur, don't do it right in the middle of the fight. Don't do it 2 minutes after the investor you were counting on said no, or the employee that you had been working with you for a year decided to leave, or the customer that you were banking on decided to put their decision off for another 6 months, right? That's not the time to evaluate yourself and your journey as an entrepreneur. I can tell you how many of us evaluate our life when everything goes great. Like, do we come back from a customer with a big contract or an investor who just agreed to put $10 million into our company? Do we sit down and say, hey, team, let's sit around a table and decide whether we want to be entrepreneurs, right? We only do it when things go badly. And that's not the time to evaluate it. Do we need time to evaluate it? Absolutely. But the time to do that is when we're more thoughtful. That might be when you're with friends on the weekend, you go with a close colleague and have a thoughtful conversation over a weekend or over dinner. Those are the times to try to evaluate whether the entrepreneurial path and the specific entrepreneurial path that you're on is worth your time and effort and as we said, blood, sweat, and tears. Okay. So, these are 10 skills. There are hundreds of them. They run the gamut from across sales, marketing, finance, managing your own energy and emotion through the process, legal issues, communication issues. Like there's tons and tons and tons of skills. And really, as we said before, because passion, grit, and a good idea is not enough, it really is essential that you embrace the journey to improve your skills as an entrepreneur. And as you get to know these things, you have more options, more approaches, more things you can use as you apply your judgment to your business to have a better chance of success. Okay. Next slide. One thing I should mention before I close, one of the things we really tried to do at The Lonely Entrepreneur is to delineate all of these different skills. I think in our product we call the Learning Community, I think there's over 300 learning modules that talk about a lot of the different skills that are out there. And Abed, as you know, there's a bunch of free resources at lonelyentrepreneur.com that each day we put out a daily tip, and a lot of these daily tips are designed to, these free tips that are designed to help people with individual development of these skills along the way. So I wanted to leave you with kind of one final thought, and that is that being an entrepreneur is not a job, it's an identity. You don't think of yourself as, okay, I have this quote unquote business, and then I leave this business at the office and I separate from it. It just doesn't work that way for those of us that really consider ourselves entrepreneur. It's really part of our identity. I remember I knew how true this was. Even though I had gone from being an attorney to being an entrepreneur, I started this entrepreneurial venture and very much thought I was an entrepreneur. But what really solidified, my belief that I was an entrepreneur was when I was finishing writing the Lonely Entrepreneur book after I had sold my company. Unfortunately, my father was very ill, and we were in the hospital, and I probably had about 10 pages left in the book, and it was a very, very sad time. But I remember that, and my father had an oxygen mask on his nose over the course of a couple of days, weeks, whatever it was. And every single day, the oxygen mask would fall off his nose over and over and over again. And even though I was in the middle of grieving and very upset, I kept saying to myself, why can't somebody invent an oxygen mask that can stay on someone's face in a hospital? When you have the entrepreneurial spirit, it becomes a part of who you are, and it doesn't become separate. And especially you go through experiences where, like mine, you feel like it's having a child. And that becomes not just a job, but an identity. So Abed, I wanted to thank you and Identity Branding Forum for having me, and of course, happy to answer any questions that have come through. And I've got a.
Okay, hello. I would like to welcome everybody for a minute before I do that. We're working with Michael and the Lonely Entrepreneur gladly to bring a lot of their modules, the some 100 modules that he spoke of as part of the IPEN Club memberships, which one of them for the entrepreneurs, it was designed as an ecosystem as you see it, but also we have done is the talents pipeline to build the talents for entrepreneurs to become innovative. So we put those two programs that we are working together with Michael and his organization as well. And those certifications, they will be available also with the colleges that are part of our programs and the relationships. So participants, they will also have the ability, the training, the talents and innovations, that's the ecosystem, and the seal of approvals of institutions in the local area in UAE at this point. Now, all the information that we have on our program are available on our website as you have it in front of you, identitybrandingforum.net, or email us your information to info@identitybrandingforum.net.